All right, let's dive into the incredibly messy and bloody dynasty of one of history's most infamous kings, Herod the Great. Now, you might think of him for his massive building projects, the grand palaces and temples, but his real story? It's a dark family drama, a saga built on strategic marriages, pure, ruthless ambition, and, yeah, a whole lot of murder. And that really brings us to the question that's at the absolute heart of this whole story. I mean, why would a king kill his own children? If we can get our heads around the kind of paranoia that drives a father to see his own sons as mortal enemies, then we can really start to understand the fractured, dangerous world of the New Testament.
So here's how we're going to unpack all of this. First, we'll look at Herod's super dangerous family dynamics. Then we'll dive into his biggest political gamble, a marriage. We'll see how that led to some unlikely heirs, unravel the scandal that got John the Baptist killed, and finally, look at the bloody legacy he left for everyone.
Okay, first thing you have to understand about a guy like Herod, marriage was never, ever about love. Forget romance. For him, it was a cold, calculated move on a giant political chessboard. Every single wife was a pawn, a piece used to lock down power, create an alliance, or, and this is the big one, produce an heir. But here's the catch. The more heirs you have, the more rivals you create.
And you can see this deadly pattern emerge right out of the gate. Let's start with his first wife, Doris. She was an Edomian, just like him, and she gave him his firstborn son, Antipater. For years, Antipater was the heir apparent, but in Herod's court, being close to the throne was basically a death sentence. And sure enough, Antipater was executed just a few days before Herod himself died. Then you have his most famous wife, Mariamne the Hasmonean, and guess what? Her sons met the exact same fate. It's a brutal cycle.
This whole pattern just gets supercharged with Herod's biggest strategic move. It was a total game changer, but it also became the source of his greatest fear. You see, marrying into the Hasmonean dynasty was his ultimate play to be seen as a legitimate king. But that prize, well, it came with a poison pill. So to really get the stakes here, we need to talk about who the Hasmoneans actually were. Think of them as the true blue blood royalty of Judea. They weren't just kings. They were also the high priests. They had the legitimacy, the respect of the people. Herod? He was an outsider, an Idumean, and he was desperate for that kind of credibility. So his big idea was to marry the Hasmonean princess, Mariamne, and basically try to graft her family's legitimacy onto his own rule. And this is what created the central, fatal paradox of his entire reign. His sons, with Mariamne, Alexander, and Aristobulus, they were perfect heirs, at least on paper. They had his power, sure, but they also had their mother's beloved Hasmonean blood, and that heritage made them incredibly popular with the people. And in Herod's paranoid mind, popularity equaled threat. These boys were walking, talking reminders that a more legitimate dynasty could just swoop in and replace him.
You can just see the tragedy unfold here. It starts out like a political fairy tale. The marriage is meant to secure his dynasty forever. Then, the heirs are born, uniting these two powerful lines. But then, the paranoia starts to creep in. It just gets worse and worse. For Herod, any little rumor, any whisper of a conspiracy was enough to convince him his sons were plotting against him. And so, in 7 BC, he did the unthinkable. He had both of them executed.
Just think about that. Two of his own sons. His direct link to Jewish royalty, the whole reason for the marriage in the first place. Killed. On his own orders. And with that single act, he created this huge power vacuum right in the middle of his kingdom. So, with the main heirs dead and gone, who's left to take over? Well, this is where the sons of Herod's other, let's say, less prestigious wives are suddenly shoved into the spotlight. And believe it or not, these are the guys who become the Herods that you read about in the New Testament. What you get is a totally fractured kingdom. The power gets split between the sons of a couple of his other wives. Malchus, who was a Samaritan, and that was a big deal, a source of suspicion for many Jews. And another wife, Cleopatra of Jerusalem. Look, these weren't the heirs Herod spent decades grooming for the throne. Nope, they were just the ones left standing after he was done killing everybody else. So Herod Archelaus gets the main prize, Judea. And this guy was so brutal, so notoriously cruel, that the Gospel of Matthew makes a point of mentioning him. It says Joseph was literally warned in a dream to stay away from his territory, which is why the Holy Family heads to Galilee instead. I mean, imagine being so terrifying that it makes it into the biblical narrative. Now,
his brother, Herod Antipas, he gets Galilee. Okay, this is the Herod you're probably most familiar with. He's the one who shows up in the stories of both John the Baptist and Jesus. And his whole reign, really, is defined by this enormous family scandal centered around his very controversial wife, Herodias. And that brings us to maybe the most tangled and, frankly, the most consequential part of this whole family saga. Because the drama between Herod's kids wasn't just some ancient reality TV show. No, this had lethal, world-changing consequences. Okay, first, a quick public service announcement, because this gets confusing. There are two important half-brothers, both named Philip. It's super easy to mix them up. You've got Herod Philip, who was the son of another wife named Mariamne. He was just a private citizen, but he was the first husband of Herodias. Then you have Philip the Tetrarch, son of Cleopatra of Jerusalem. This guy was an actual ruler. Luke's gospel mentions him, and from what we know, he was a decent, stable leader. So two Philips, very different guys. Got it? Good. All right, so here's how the scandal that killed a prophet went down. Step 1, Herodias, remember, she's the daughter of one of those executed Hasmonean sons, is married to the private citizen Herod Philip. Step 2, she leaves him for his much more powerful half-brother, Herod Antipas. Step 3, John the Baptist calls them out, publicly condemning the marriage as totally unlawful. And step 4, Herodias is so insulted, so furious, that she masterminds a plot to have John the Baptist executed. Just like that, a messy family divorce leads directly to the death of a major prophet. So after all these strategic marriages, all the paranoia, all the bloodshed, what was the end result? What kind of kingdom did Herod actually leave behind? And we can't forget about all the others, because the list goes on. Herod had at least 10 wives. The sons he had with wives like Pallas, Phaedra, and Elpis, they never even got a sniff of power. They just fade away from history. And their story, or lack of one, really proves a crucial point about this family. In Herod's court, who your mother was and whether you could survive all the backstabbing mattered way more than just being the firstborn. And here's the ultimate irony, the main takeaway from all this. In his desperate, paranoid quest to secure his dynasty, Herod achieved the exact opposite. He murdered his best and most legitimate heirs, and he left behind a weak, fractured kingdom for his less capable sons to fight over. He personally created the unstable, divided political landscape that we see in the New Testament. The world Jesus was born into was shaped by this man's fear. So the next time you're reading the Gospels and you see the name Herod, remember, you're not just reading about one guy. You're reading about an entire legacy. It's the echo of a dynasty that was built on a toxic foundation of fear, ambition, and just incredible bloodshed. And that leaves us with a really fascinating what if to think about, doesn't it? What if Herod had trusted his sons instead of fearing them? What if he had actually built a strong, unified kingdom with those Hasmonean heirs? How different would the whole stage of history have been for the incredible events that were about to unfold in Galilee and Judea? It really makes you wonder.